In this session, we are going to talk a little further uh, on the coastal regulatory mechanisms by the department, Coast Conservation and Coastal Resource Management Department, how they intervene and uh, what are their mechanisms, right? So in previous session, we talk about the legislation behind the that apply to the Coast Conservation Department. That starting from the Coast Conservation Act number 57 of 81, and later amendments, and especially the Coastal 2000, which is called a resource management strategy for Sri Lanka's coastal region. So that is another very important policy guideline that developed by the department. And also they have developed other strategies like the community participation, and especially the some special area management was the same sites, and also monitoring and some research support, right? So other than that, actually there had been other regulatory mechanisms as well. As you already know, so this is the latest, I mean the image showing the latest the legislation, but on your left side you can see the different versions of the legislation starting from 1981, right? And this is the updated the version which we have already discussed about, right? Now when come to the regulatory mechanism of this coast conservation department, there are several steps or mechanisms. The one of the major thing is the issuing of permits. So they have a system of issuing permits for the coastal development or some activities, prohibition of some activities, designation of setback standards, variances and exemptions, right? Setback standards, I'll come to that one. The development of restrictions, monitoring, removal of unauthorized structures, the delegation of powers between the officials or the institutes, provision of guidelines and standard for the activities, especially the standards, and requirement of environmental impact assessment and IEE, or the initial environmental examinations, right? I'll come to that one later on, right? So very briefly, we will go through some of these things, like starting from the permit mechanism. If you go to their website, in the top of that their website, it means about the e-permits, but also the other mechanisms. You can see that how to get permit, right? So they says that it's the principal tool used by the CCD to manage the activities within the coastal zone, because the permits are given to some people only, but also that also under some regulations, some guidance, right? So large development, they all have to get some permit from the Coast Conservation Department, and that might need to renew, right? So the purpose of the permit is to direct development activities to minimize the negative impact, right? So that's particularly the environmental and social impact. So that's how the permits are given, right? And it is being obligatory. I mean, it is a legal requirement as per the actor, right? It no matter it's a government or private sector, right? There is no difference. Even the government sector, then we have to get that permit, right? From the head of the institute. Earlier it was director, now it's a director general. Now, all these have a mechanism. If you go to the website, you can um, read these things. That there is a process of issuing permits where it is clearly mentioned how to get the approval of the permission. That they have to provide the application with the information about the project, and the department will look at what kind of projects, the magnitude, how large it is, and then what would be the impact from that project. It may be a harbor, fishery harbor, a hotel, a beach park, or whatever the development, and what will be the impacts. So that's how they look at. But there are some activities, certain activities in the coastal zone are exempt from this permit mechanism. For example, fishing. To operate fishing, you don't need a permit, right? But to build a fishery harbor, you need a permit. Right? Only for fishing for the people, it's allowed. Cultivation crops that do not destabilize the coast. Now, you can plant something, but as far as it is not disturbing the coast, and any other tree plantations, right? And especially the coastal protection work and the other coastal erosion management plans and emergency procedures. So they don't need any permit because they are particularly a work of the CCD themselves, right? The coastal protection work. And some emergency procedures, maybe maybe from the disaster management, or suddenly they want to make something as to avoid some floods. They have to cut open the river mouth or remove some sand from somewhere for emergency purpose. So that's where they don't need a permit. Rather than that, they means the developers has to get the permit. So I have mentioned here, or I have given a screenshot from that legislation, that the Coastal Zone and Coastal Resource Management Plan of 2018. As per that legislation, the permit system is given here, right? It's all this information here you can go through. Development activities within the coastals for which permit is required, right? These activities, condominiums, that's the housing schemes, dwelling houses, the walls, sea walls or something, right? Or other protected structures, industrial and other commercial structures, tourism, recreational, pools, commercial and fisheries, harbors, structures, navigational channels, roads, bridges, tunnels, railway lines. Right. So these are some of the things that if any of these going to be within the coastal zone, they have to get the permit, right? They have to get permit from the Coast Conservation Department, right? Now, for the mechanism of obtaining the permits, as you can see here earlier, I mean, that means before 2018, that's before the latest update, there were 3 types of permits. It's called the major permits, minor permits, and emergency permits. The major permits were the large scale project where they have to get the permit from the head of the institute. That's a director, now it is Director General from the Coast Conservation, right? They are the major permits. Then like other smaller kind of development which need to get a minor permit from a divisional secretary or the other divisional office of the Coast Conservation Department or other authorized people. Mostly from the AG offices you can get these permits. And third one is the emergency permits. As I mentioned before, in an emergency situation, they can get emergency permit. But according to the latest update, there are 2 categories they call as a type A permit, type B permit. Type A is the development activity within which requires EIA, right? It's a large scale development which need a EIA or IE. They are called the type A permit, and type B permits are the projects are not that large scale but still need some concerns, which they don't have to go through EIA or IE, but they still need to get permission, right? But if they think that the impacts are not that serious, then only they give type B permits, right? That's how it goes, but that is the latest situation, type A and type B permits, right? And the other one is the earlier. Now, the emergency permit, as I mentioned before, these can be obtained from the head office of the CCD, from the director general or the director or the divisional secretary, as per the act. It is a temporary permit which is effective only for 7 days, right? Up to 7 days they can get this permit. And especially therefore, flood control. In a emergency situation, there are going to be a severe flood, then they can request this emergency permit or some removing sandbars I mentioned before. And if something, severe threat to the people or the property, in that kind of a situation, if some building that's going to cause some damages to people, then in that emergency situation, either CCD or someone else can act immediately without obtaining a permit, in an emergency situation, right? That's how the permit procedures, right? The second one is the prohibited activities. Now they have listed out some of the work which is prohibited to undergo in the coastal zone. For example, the removal of corals. No one can remove corals or coral reefs, even a dead corals. Like when you are in the beach, if you are collecting corals, even dead corals, it is illegal, right? You can prosecute, or you can take to the police, or even you can charge against because they are protected. Removal of sand, except it's the identified areas recognized for removal of sand. And any other development that will degrade the quality of the area and which will affect the scenic or cultural value of the coastal zone, especially the beaches. And any kind of a development in a protected areas, the already designated protected areas like national parks, strict nature reserves, the sanctuaries, jungle corridors, or marine reserves. We don't have actually buffer zones, Ramsar wetlands, any kind of a protected area. And the other one is 400 meters within the archaeological or historical important place. Like any activity within 400 meters of very important historical cultural area, still you cannot do any development activities, right? But still, as I mentioned before, some activities mentioned here, they are permitted to undertake in the coastal zone without any permits. Fishing and some plantations, right? For example. Okay. So under their regulatory mechanism, there is another concept called setback areas, right? It's not setback, it's setback areas. It's a single term. A setback area is a small stretch in the coastal zone where some activities are prohibited or restricted, especially the development. Any kind of a development is prohibited or restricted, right? In a setback stretch, there are two areas actually. It's called the reservation area and restricted area. I don't know whether you got that one right. Setback area, there are two parts, the reservation area and the restricted area, right? The reservation area is the area close to the sea, right, from the seaward reference line up to a landward, right? And the usually the seaward line start from 0.6 meters from the mean sea surface, right? And the other one is the landward reference site. I don't think you got the idea. Now something like this, right? This is the sea, right? We call this is seaward, and this is a seaward reference line. Right? This is the mean sea level. We take 0.6 meters, right? From mean sea level 0.6 meters. This is the place for the seaward reference line. From that, we have a reservation area we call the no build zone. There is no any construction is allowed in this area, right? No construction, but there may be some already construction that doesn't apply to that, but anything new, you cannot have any construction, new construction. But the other area called the restricted area, which is has some limited activity, some limitations here. And that is the end of the landward reference line, right? So the setback area is altogether these two areas, reservation area and restricted area, right? So together we call the setback area or setback zone within the coastal zone, right? Setback area, right? The reservation area we call the no build zone. As I mentioned, no hotels or anything that can be constructed in that no build zone, right? And the restricted area, and which is called as the soft zone, is a sort of a buffer zone, right? Some low impact activities you can happen, something like you can have a house but not a hotel, or some highly impacting things you cannot have it in, right? Right. Now this setback area actually, to protect the people or the structures from coastal hazards. And now this setback area also considers as some sort of soft solution. Remember, previously we discussed about the hard solutions like a construction of sea walls and many activities, but this is a soft solution. Now you just put a boundary, don't do anything, don't do any construction or within that zone, which just to protect. There are many reasons why they have this setback zone or the setback line or area, right? Protecting life and property from adverse impact, minimizing public investment, because if you do a lot of the construction in this area, that will ended up in destroying, and protecting vulnerable areas, right? Vulnerable coast habitats. Likewise, minimizing user conflicts, ensuring public access to the coast, maintaining consistency among national and regional laws. And right now, you have a stretch, a belt in the coastal zone where you can't have any construction, right? But unfortunately, already there are some construction in some areas which it's a bit hard to remove. But anyway, so that there can't be any new construction. Now this concept of the coastal setback, right? This setback is a single word, right? I'm wrong here. It depends on the width of these setback areas, depend on different areas have different setback areas. Usually it varies from 35 meters to 125 meters, right? Some areas 35, some areas 125 wider, right? And If you remember, after the tsunami, the government introduced some 100 or 200-meter uniform coastal setback. That is, but this is other than the setback area by the Coast Conservation Department. But you know, this 100 and 200 concept now, it's not really working, because you know, if you leave 200 meters from the beach, you can't have anything in the coastal zone. But the 35 to 125 is already there, which everybody has to obey, but in certain cases you can have some development within that, right? There is a lot of information here. You don't have to remember these things, just for your information only. And if you go to the website, as you can see here, right, there is a tab for what you call the setback information, right? Setback information. If you go to that one, there is a map. It is an interactive map, right? All these different coastal districts are here, color coded. And if you need a particular district, like if you want to Colombo, you just click on that one, and that will give this setback area, right? There is a number for a different segment. You can see the Duva, Pitipana, Vidya, Moravala to Dikovita Harbor, north boundary. GPS locations are there. The level of vulnerability medium. Reservation area is 15 meters, restricted area 30 meters, and that's come to the 45-meter setback area. That's very clear, right? You can have a look this one. You can check any area, right? Even if you want, you're looking for a development somewhere here, you just need to go to that segment, and you have to look at where is that location exactly, and then you can look at the setback area. You can see here, Punyakuda, Punya is not Punyakuda, it's Punnikuda, it's not Punyakuda. It's 125, now that's the widest setback. Okay, likewise, you can get an idea about the setback area from that site as well, right? And you can see there is a corresponding number to each segment of the setback area, and then you have to look into that one, right? So all these are coming from that setback areas, right? Okay, what are allowed in the reservation area? All right, the director, or now the Director General of CCD, may issue permits to persons engaged in the following activities, like expecting or believing that they won't cause a serious impact to the coastal zone, something like a coastal protection structures, jetties, piers on shipways, any water intakes, especially for power plant, right? Any tube wells, some navigation of removal of navigational obstructions, extraction of minerals, some communication cables submerged, for example, like that, some temporary structures, something like that, will allow temporary structures up to 6 months will be allowed within the reservation area still, right? Right. But that believing that they won't cause severe harm to the coastal zone. At the same time, there is an exemption from the setback. The exemption may be granted by the director only if the Coast Conservation Advisory Council determines that there are compelling reason, right? They have to, the director alone cannot do it, but they have to get the advice from the CCAC, that's the Coast Conservation Advisory Council. The some exemptions you can request, especially the some government institute can ask for some exemption, right? They have to make a request. For example, like when you're going to have a wind power plant, a coastal zone, you can request for exemption because you know, after construction there is no much impact to the coastal zone, so they might be accepted, right? And also they will have some variances, so little diversion to these setback areas in case of you know, some protected areas in particular. As listed, there are so many protected areas, marine protected state national parks or anything, conservation forests, national heritage wilderness areas, 300-meter setback from fisheries management areas or fisheries reserves, right? 400-meter setback from coastal archaeological, right? So in case, you know, these are variance difference. Now usually the setback is 125 maximum, but in case of, if it is like a fisheries management area or fisheries reserve, then the noble zone or the setback area is 300 meters, and it's a important coastal archaeological site, and that will be 400 meters, right? There is no built, you can't have anything within that boundary, right? So that's how it works. The others are the development restriction. You know, any unauthorized development within the coastal zone, the CCD Director General has sole power to remove it. They don't have to get even a court order, right? They have the power to remove unauthorized buildings, right? And even they can charge from the developer the cost for the demolition, or the, you know, to break it and to remove or dispose, that cost even can charge to the developer, right? So they have that power, right? So if your house is somewhere in the coastal zone, be aware the CCD can even remove it, right? Right. The regulatory mechanism of the CCD is the monitoring and compliances. So they do a lot of monitoring work, especially the water quality monitoring, and need for the, you know, especially for the developing standards for the discharge, right? They do, you know, regular monitoring of a beach area, some bathing areas, and likewise, so they will do some monitoring work, right? The others, as I mentioned, the removal of unauthorized structures, delegation of power, right? So they might delegate the power with the other organizations like Marine Environment Protection Authority or CEA. Standards, national standards for the, you know, discharge of effluents to the marine and coastal environment. The other important thing is, most important thing is the environmental impact assessment and initial environmental examination, right? This is part of a environmental clearance or the permit. It's one way of getting permit for the large scale development, right? EIA and IEE, right? I have given a sort of a full description from the policy about the EIA and IEA. You just read this one, right? It's not anything complicated anyway. It's mentioned the procedure. Upon receipt of an application for a permit to engage in a development activity within the coastal zone as required by the subsection 3 of section 6, the Director General may require the applicant to furnish an initial environmental examination IEE or EIA report relating to the development activity. As the case may be or may such reports, it shall be the duty of the applicant to comply with such requirement. Right? So that's the legislations clearly mentioned that they have to undergo either IEE or EIA with the recommendation from the Coast Conservation Department, right? And sometimes this one will go along with the National Environment Act because you know the in Sri Lanka the main power to conduct the EIAs are actually in the National Environment Act of the Ministry of Environment under the, and that's the Central Environment Authority. But within the coastal zone, it's the right of the CCD. They have the power to do this one, but usually they will negotiate with the CEA sometimes in a EIAs, right? Here I have given a summary of the process of conducting IEE or EIA. You know, if you haven't done this one before, just you know, it's a bit of a long, very lengthy procedure to have a EIA or IE, and an EIA IE will be a separate lecture series. Right, so at least you need 15 lectures to cover EIA, but I've just briefly, if you look at, once the developer, you know, if the project is within the coastal zone, the developer has to provide, they have to file a permit application, which they have a prescribed application in their department. They have to fill it with all the information that needed. They have to submit it, and the CCD will determine, after looking at the information provided, and also they will do a field inspection or the site inspection, and after that they will decide. The Director General of the CEA has the power to determine whether they have to conduct IEE or EIA, or they don't have to do. So if he decides or she decides no need a EIA or EIA, then they will issue the permit, but they will provide some guideline, right, how to proceed with that development. But if they decide that they have to do IE or EIA, then they have to do IE or EIA as required, and they have to prepare, the developer has to prepare IE report or EIA report, then they have to send it to the CCD, which they will do the review along with the other government institutes, because the stakeholder institutes, because the CCD alone cannot do this. All the other stakeholders like fisheries, the wildlife, Navy, Coast Guards, CEA, Tourism Department, Port Authority, or maybe a lot of other people, NARA, fisheries, did I mention? Likewise, they all will come together and have a meeting, whether that EIA is enough or not, then they, or otherwise they have to revise the EIA report or IE report. And if it is not satisfactory, they will ask to revise it, or if it is, if the impacts are so serious, they will refuse to provide the permit, or they can deny, right? If they satisfy, then they will issue the permit to proceed. And once the permit is granted, and the CCD will do the monitoring, like they will monitor the activity throughout the development as well as the project cycle, right? Throughout until the end of the project, theoretically, right? So if they deny or if they go against the development, then still the developer can appeal from the secretary to the ministry. As I mentioned, it may be whoever the secretary. Earlier it was the fisheries, Then later it became the Environmental Ministry, and I think it's now under the Ministry of Defense. Then the Defense Secretary had to get the appeal. If he agrees, he can grant permission, or otherwise they can still deny, right? And this is how the EIAs work in a nutshell. You know, this is a very lengthy procedure. It will take several months to years to complete a IEOEA report. Personally, I have involved, you know, as a, EIA expert in many development work in the coastal and marine environment. So I have a lot of experience working on this. Anyway, so if you have any questions on this, you can still raise. So otherwise, that's the end of the story about the laws, policies, regulation, the institutional capacities, their mechanisms. This is basically within the Coast Conservation and Coastal Resource Management Department, right, or CCD. That is a lot, right? But these are looks bit complicated, but these are usual procedures that they follow. So if you are someone interested on working in any of these institutes, definitely then you have to be familiar with this very important concepts. Okay, so that's all for the day. We'll see you again next week.